Iran is vowing to respond. What could that look like, and how likely is this conflict to widen? I'm joined now by former Chief of Defense Staff, retired General Tom Lawson. General Lawson, good to have you with us. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Vashi.
I wanted to start off on the element of surprise, and actually whether you are surprised that this took place, given Trump's rhetoric right until the last minute, but also his kind of posture against war more generally during the campaign.
Well, I don't think I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that the attack occurred. I think that President Trump was likely employing a little bit of a ruse with his 2-week statement, which is useful in military tactics in operations like this. I think the time for clear negotiations with no threat had ended, and I think the rhetoric coming from the president indicated that this was a likelihood. Certainly, Mr. Trump is not often constant in a lot of his points of view, but this is one that he has been consistent about for a decade and more.
So the briefing provided by the Secretary of Defense and what would have been, pardon me, your counterpart in the United States earlier today, kind of detailed, 14 of these massive ordnance penetrators were deployed for the first time, the number of crew that were kind of flown in with very little communication overnight that went undetected, they said, over the 3 nuclear sites. Is what happened something only the U.S. military is capable of, and why?
Yes. And I don't think we should underestimate the complexity of an operation like this. The ruse that was employed using aircraft out of Diego Garcia could have been very useful in providing some extra protection for those coming from Missouri on the 20-hour flight over into Iran. They were met along the way by American forces that are in theater now, and all of this suggests a refueling capability and bombers, fighters, integration with the Israelis, certainly, that only the United States could carry out, and they did it professionally. There was always going to be a lot of things that could go wrong in such a complex mission, and happily it appears that this came off as the military and the government would have hoped.
What is your assessment at this juncture of the potential and scope of retaliation? I took note of Secretary Hegseth on multiple occasions saying that they view this as intentionally limited, the scope of what they did as intentionally limited, that they, targeted the nuclear facilities, and both he and his colleagues went out of the way to say not the Iranian people, et cetera, et cetera. He explicitly said, and you can believe him or not, certainly, but that this isn't about, for them, regime change. And again, there'll be a lot of people who disagree with that assessment. But what does that tell you about what we could possibly expect as far as retaliation, and how vulnerable are U.S. troops right now in the Middle East?
The Secretary was reflecting the President's indications that this was a very limited and focused strike by the Americans in an effort to minimize the response, at least to the United States. I think the hope is that the Americans can back out, having done significant damage, that will buy time for something good to happen. I don't think we should underestimate the value of buying time. It's never going to be perfect. The regime is likely not going to falter, and they will probably double down on their nuclear program efforts in coming years. But in those years, other things can happen. Not sure what they will be, but they probably will not make things worse than they were just a few months ago, when they were, by all indications, only weeks away from having a nuclear weapon, which would give them the insurance and impunity against any attacks from the United States or from Israel. So for that limited goal, the Americans want to see if they can extricate themselves at this point. I'm not sure that will be possible.
I wanted to also ask you about some of the incongruities between what we heard from President Trump, for example, and then what we heard from the sort of military side of things, namely around what the what the success level was. The president said that that the nuclear sites had been obliterated, their ability to make a nuclear weapon obliterated, and the chairman of Joint Staff was clear that the final battle assessment has yet to be completed. What does your gut tell you about the degree to which this would have been effective in destroying Iran's capacity to build a nuclear weapon?
Well, certainly what the president said last night about it having been a massive success was simply rhetoric. Until the battle damage assessment, it is, as you rightly point out, is in. That cannot be said with any accuracy. They will have had time now to assess damage using satellites and overflights, and even that will be difficult to know just exactly how much damage has been done. And even if it's complete damage to Fordo and Natanz and Isfahan, there may be other sites deep in mountains elsewhere that will allow the Iranians to restart their program in coming months and years. But again, I think obliterating all ability to extend their nuclear program is impossible. The whole tactic here is to buy time for something else to happen, and hopefully that would be good.
So there are a lot of people who will right now be worried that the something else that happens, particularly in the near future in the Middle East, is not going to be good. If you could tell me what you will be watching for in the coming hours, in the coming days, to determine ultimately how limited, if at all, this conflict is.
Right. So I think, if any one of us was in charge of the regime in Iran right now, this would be a time to be humble, to back off, and to start negotiation. But this is a very prideful regime. Khamenei has been a true believer for 50 years. He was among the first amongst those who were part of the revolution in 1979. He is none of those things that I just suggested. So I think there's a possibility anyway that some of his missiles may now be targeted on the bases that the Americans, people in Bahrain, Qatar, in Kuwait, and in Iraq. And if he is successful in killing Americans and destroying billions of dollars worth of material, then and closing perhaps the Straits of Hormuz and starting an oil war around the world, I think that will require further American involvement.
Right.
And where it spirals to from that point, it becomes a little more difficult to predict.
General Lawson, I'll leave it on that note. Appreciate your insights as always. That's General Tom Lawson. When we come back today, Donald Trump and Mark Carney have put a 30-day deadline on trade talks. Is a deal within reach? Industry Minister Melanie Joly is my next guest.